On the 15th of September 1940, the Luftwaffe launched its final massed assault against Britain. Over 1,000 German aircraft crossed the English Channel, and the fate of the entire war came down to the decisions of one man, standing 60 feet underground in a concrete bunker beneath the suburbs of West London. His name was Air Vice Marshal Keith Park. He was not British. He was a New Zealander, born in a gold mining town at the edge of the world. And on that Sunday afternoon, he controlled every fighter aircraft defending southern England. Around him, young women of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force pushed coloured markers across a vast plotting table with long wooden rakes, tracking wave after wave of incoming bombers. Behind him, a wall of light bulbs displayed the status of every squadron under his command. One by one, those lights turned red, meaning engaged with the enemy. By mid-afternoon, every single light was red. Every squadron was airborne. Every fighter was committed to the battle. Winston Churchill stood beside him in that underground room, watching the lights in silence. Then he turned and asked a quiet question. He wanted to know what reserves were left. Park gave him an answer that still echoes through history. There were none. And yet they held. The German formations broke apart and turned back over the Channel. 2 days later, Hitler postponed his invasion of Britain indefinitely. Keith Park had won the most important air battle in the history of warfare. Within 2 months, he was removed from his command. His rival, the man who had spent the entire battle scheming against him from behind the lines, took his place. The official Air Ministry account of the battle, a pamphlet that sold over 300,000 copies on its first day, did not mention Keith Park's name, not once. It would take 70 years before the city he saved erected a statue in his honor. This is the story of the man who stood between Britain and invasion, who made the right decisions under impossible pressure, and who was then erased from the history he had written. His enemies received promotions. He received silence. His name was Keith Park, and almost nobody remembers him. To understand what Keith Park faced that September, you first need to understand what happened in the weeks before. Because by the summer of 1940, Europe had already fallen. On the 10th of May, German forces invaded France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, all at once. Within 5 days, the Netherlands had surrendered. Belgium lasted 18. And France, the largest army in Western Europe, the nation that had held the line for 4 years in the previous war, collapsed in just 6 weeks. The armistice was signed on the 22nd of June in the same railway carriage where Germany had surrendered in 1918. It was a deliberate humiliation. By that point, the list of conquered nations was staggering. Poland, Denmark, which had lasted a single day, Norway, Luxembourg, which fell in hours, the Netherlands, Belgium, and now France. The entire continent was under German control, or allied with it. Britain was alone. The British army had been rescued from Dunkirk, just barely. Between the 26th of May and the 4th of June, more than 338,000 troops were pulled off the beaches by a fleet of destroyers, fishing boats, and Thames River ferries. The men were saved, but everything else was left behind. 700 tanks, nearly 2,500 artillery pieces, more than 60,000 vehicles. After Dunkirk, Britain had enough equipment to properly arm just 2 divisions. Some soldiers came home without their rifles, and across the Channel, the most powerful military machine in modern history was preparing to cross. On the 16th of July, Hitler issued Directive Number 16, ordering a full-scale invasion of Britain, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. The plan was enormous. Over 260,000 troops, 60,000 horses, and nearly 2,500 river barges gathered in every port from Rotterdam to Le Havre. The landing beaches stretched along the coast of Sussex and Kent, from Folkestone to Brighton, but the directive contained one critical condition. Before a single barge could launch, the Royal Air Force had to be destroyed. Complete air superiority over the English Channel was not a preference. It was an absolute requirement, and here is why. The Royal Navy was still the most powerful fleet on Earth. In home waters alone, Britain had battleships, cruisers, and more than 60 destroyers ready to respond within hours. Against this, Germany had almost nothing afloat. The Kriegsmarine had lost nearly half its destroyer force during the invasion of Norway just months earlier. By summer, Germany could put fewer than 10 destroyers to sea. The arithmetic was brutal. German invasion barges, flat-bottomed riverboats designed for the calm waters of the Rhine, could manage 2 to 3 knots when towed. The shortest channel crossing would take over 12 hours. At night, when the Luftwaffe could not fly, British destroyers would tear through those barge convoys at 30 knots. The wash alone from a single destroyer at speed would be enough to swamp the shallow barges around it. It would not be a battle. It would be a slaughter. There was only one way Germany could prevent this. The Luftwaffe had to control the skies above the Channel. If German aircraft could keep the Royal Navy at bay during daylight and destroy enough of Fighter Command to prevent interference, then perhaps enough troops could get across to establish a foothold. Without air superiority, the invasion was impossible. The barges would never reach the English coast. So the fate of Britain, and with it the fate of the entire war, did not rest on the army. It did not rest on the navy. It rested on the air battle over southern England. If the RAF could hold, the invasion could not happen. If the RAF broke, nothing could stop it. And the man responsible for fighting that air battle, the man who would decide which squadrons flew when they launched and where they fought, was Keith Park. Keith Rodney Park was born on the 15th of June, 1892, in Thames, New Zealand. Thames had once been a gold rush boomtown of 18,000 people. By the time Park arrived, the gold was running out. It was a quiet town at the bottom of the world. His father was a Scottish geologist who ran the local school of mines. His mother left the family and moved to Australia. Park grew up in his father's care, the 9th of 10 children, in a household built around science and discipline. He was not a remarkable student. He was exceptionally tall, 6'5", keen on guns and horses. At 19, he went to sea as a trainee purser on cargo ships, earning the family nickname Skipper. It was a modest beginning for a man who would one day control the most important air battle in history. When the war came in 1914, Park volunteered immediately. On the 25th of April, 1915, he went ashore at Anzac Cove, Gallipoli. He was 22 years old. Gallipoli was a catastrophe. Park commanded a naval gun under constant Turkish counterfire. He was promoted under fire, led a battery during the assault on Suvla Bay, and endured 9 months of conditions that marked him for life. He admired the Anzac commander, General Birdwood, a man who paid attention to detail and looked after his people. It was a model Park carried forward into everything he did. His battery was evacuated to Egypt, then shipped to France, to the Somme. Here, 2 things changed his life. First, he went up in an observation aircraft and saw how easily British gun positions could be spotted from the air. He never forgot it. Second, on the 21st of October, 1916, a German shell blew him off his horse. He was wounded, evacuated to England and assessed by a medical board. Their verdict, unfit for active service, which technically meant he could no longer ride a horse. Years later, Park noted the absurdity with typical understatement. They considered him unfit to sit on a horse. but perfectly fit to fly an airplane. Tradition was strong in the days of horse-drawn artillery. If you could not ride, you were no use to the guns. So in December 1916, Park transferred to the Royal Flying Corps. He learned to fly at Netheravon, spent 3 months as an instructor, and in July 1917 joined No. 48 Squadron in France. He flew the Bristol Fighter, a powerful 2-seat biplane. Within weeks, he earned the Military Cross for destroying 4 German aircraft in a single sortie. By September, he was a captain. He returned to France as a major and took command of No. 48 Squadron in April 1918. By that time, he was the only surviving pilot from the squadron's previous year. Every man he had flown with was gone. By the war's end, Park had at least 20 aerial victories. He had been shot down twice. He had earned the Military Cross and Bar, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and the French Croix de Guerre. He was the highest scoring pilot ever to serve with his squadron. But what defined Park was not his flying skill. It was his temperament, calm, methodical, attentive to detail. He looked after his people and despised the kind of personal ambition that put careers ahead of results. He avoided politics entirely. It was exactly the wrong personality for the peacetime Royal Air Force, where promotion depended on connections and charm. And it was exactly the right personality for the crisis that was coming. Before a single shot was fired in the Battle of Britain, the battle had already been won or lost on the ground, because the weapon that would decide everything was not an aircraft. It was a system, and nothing like it had ever existed before. In 1934, the Royal Air Force ran a large-scale exercise, 350 aircraft, half bombers approaching London, half fighters trying to stop them. The fighters were given every advantage, including advanced knowledge of where the bombers were heading. The result was a disaster. 70% of the bombers reached London without a single fighter even seeing them. The conclusion was stark. Britain could not defend itself from air attack. One man refused to accept this. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, quiet, stubborn, deeply unpopular, with his own air ministry, spent the next 5 years building a solution from nothing. What he created was called the Dowding System. It was the world's first integrated air defense network, and it changed warfare forever. The first layer was radar, a chain of tall steel towers along the south and east coasts, called Chain Home, sent radio waves out over the sea and detected aircraft by their reflections. By the summer of 1940, there were 20 Chain Home stations and 30 Chain Home low stations designed to catch aircraft flying below 1,000 feet. They could detect incoming formations up to 100 miles away, giving roughly 15 minutes of warning before enemy aircraft reached the coast. But radar pointed outward, over the sea. Once aircraft crossed the coastline, radar lost them. So the second layer was human. The Royal Observer Corps, over 30,000 volunteers stationed in posts across the country, tracked enemy aircraft by sight and sound after they came inland. Every sighting was reported by telephone to regional centers. All of this information, radar plots, observer reports, radio intercepts, flowed into a single room. The filter room at Fighter Command Headquarters, Bentley Priory. Here, teams of women from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force sorted the data, eliminated duplicates, and assigned track numbers to each incoming raid. Colored markers were placed on a vast map table and updated every 2.5 minutes. In the middle of chaos, this room produced clarity. The filtered picture was then passed down to Group Headquarters. For Southeast England, that meant the underground bunker at RAF Uxbridge, where Keith Park would sit. He could see every incoming raid, every squadron under his command, and the status of every airfield, all displayed on the plotting table and tote board below him. From Park's bunker, the information went one step further to sector stations. Biggin Hill, Hornchurch, Kenley, Tangmere, Northolt, Debden, North Weald. 7 stations, each controlling 2 to 4 squadrons. At each station, a controller sat with a direct radio link to the pilots in the air and guided them onto the incoming enemy formations with a precision no air force in the world had ever achieved. The numbers tell the story. Before this system existed, fighters successfully intercepted their targets roughly 30 to 50% of the time. With the Dowding System, the interception rate rose to over 90%. Several raids were met with 100% success. The system effectively tripled the fighting power of every squadron Park had, and Park had helped build it. In 1938, he became Dowding's right-hand man, senior air staff officer at Fighter Command. Together they integrated radar, radio and fighter tactics into a single operational doctrine. When Park proposed filtering the raw radar data before it reached the plotting tables, stripping out duplicates and errors that cluttered the picture, Dowding resisted. Park ran unauthorized trials behind his back, showed him the results, and changed his mind. The filter room, the beating heart of the entire system, worked because Park insisted on it. On the 20th of April 1940, Park was promoted to Air Vice Marshal and given command of 11 Group, the most important fighter group in the Royal Air Force. It covered London and the entire southeast of England, 7 sector stations, roughly 21 to 25 squadrons at any given time, around 350 fighters, approximately 550 pilots. Against him, the Luftwaffe was preparing to send over 1,000 bombers, 400 single-engine fighters, and 300 twin-engine fighters. Park was outnumbered by more than 3 to 1, but he had the system. He knew exactly where the enemy was coming from, how many there were, and how high they were flying, before they even crossed the coast. His job was not to match the Luftwaffe plane for plane. His job was to put the right number of fighters in the right place at the right time, and to do it again and again and again, every single day, without running out of pilots. No one had ever fought a battle like this before, and the man who would fight it was a New Zealander who hated politics and avoided attention, sitting in a concrete bunker 60 feet underground. Before the battle officially began, Park had already fought over Dunkirk, and he had fought it unlike any air commander before him. While 300,000 soldiers waited on the beaches, Park climbed into his personal Hurricane, code OK-1, and flew over the battle himself, an Air Vice Marshal, alone in a fighter, over an active war zone, because he refused to command what he could not see. What he saw changed his tactics. Single patrols were being overwhelmed. He switched to stronger formations, 2, sometimes 4 squadrons, with gaps between. The soldiers on the beaches cursed the RAF for being absent, but over 9 days his fighters flew nearly 3,000 sorties, and the evacuation succeeded. Park had learned how to fight outnumbered. He would need that lesson very soon. 10th of July 1940, the Battle of Britain officially began. Luftwaffe bombers attacked convoys in the Channel. Park's system tracked them, intercepted them, held, but these were probing attacks. The real onslaught was coming. 12th of August, the Luftwaffe tried to blind the system. Specialist fighter bombers struck 5 radar stations along the south coast. 3 went off the air for hours. Ventnor on the Isle of Wight was knocked out for 11 days, but the British masked the gap by transmitting signals from neighbouring stations, and the Luftwaffe never realised how close they had come. Goering concluded radar stations were too difficult to destroy and stopped targeting them, one of the most consequential blunders of the entire war. 13th of August, Adlertag, Eagle Day. 1,485 Luftwaffe sorties in 10 hours. It was meant to finish Fighter Command. It did not. German intelligence had catastrophically failed. The airfields they hit belonged to Coastal Command, not Fighter Command. Park stations were untouched. The system held. 15th of August, the greatest day. All three Luftwaffe air fleets attacked simultaneously for the first and only time. Nearly 2,000 sorties across the length of Britain. In the south, Park's squadrons fought wave after wave, but the real shock came from Norway. Luftwaffe 5 sent 65 bombers and 34 heavy fighters against the northeast, expecting no resistance, believing all of Fighter Command's strength was in the south. They were wrong. The raiders lost 23 aircraft without bringing down a single defender. Luftwaffe 5 never attempted a large-scale daylight raid on Britain again. The next day, Churchill visited Park's bunker at Uxbridge. He sat for 5 hours watching the plotting table, the markers moving, the tote board lighting up, controllers sending squadron after squadron into the air. At one point, every single squadron in 11 Group was engaged, nothing left in reserve. That evening, driving to Chequers in silence, Churchill spoke the words that would echo through history. 5 days later, he repeated them before Parliament. The men they described would be known forever as the few, and then the Luftwaffe finally worked it out. On the 18th of August, the hardest day, bombers attacked RAF Kenley in a triple-wave assault. Low-level Dorniers came in at rooftop height, followed by formations from medium and high altitude. Hangars were gutted. The station hospital took a direct hit. 12 ground staff were lost. Communications were completely severed. Controllers had to relocate to a butcher's shop in the nearby town of Caterham because the sector station itself had ceased to function. But Kenley was only the beginning. On the 24th of August, the Luftwaffe shifted its entire strategy. No more radar stations, no more coastal airfields. Now they went straight for the heart of Park's system, the 7 sector stations that controlled every fighter in 11 Group. What followed were 12 of the most dangerous days of the entire war. The Luftwaffe averaged 1,000 sorties a day. On the worst days, over 1,600. Biggin Hill, the station guarding the approaches to South London, was hit 6 times in 3 days. On the 30th of August, a handful of low-level bombers reduced it to a shambles with 1,000-pound bombs. Workshops, barracks, hangars wrecked. 39 ground personnel were lost. The next day, a direct hit destroyed the operations block itself. 3 young women of the WAAF earned military medals by refusing to leave their posts while the station collapsed around them. By this point, Dowding had lost 80% of his squadron commanders. The men leading formations into combat were no longer experienced flight leaders. They were junior officers, sometimes sergeants, promoted because there was simply no one left above them. Training for replacement pilots was slashed from months to weeks. New arrivals were being sent up, with barely a dozen hours on Spitfires or Hurricanes. Many did not survive their first sortie. The 31st of August was the single worst day of the entire battle. Fighter Command lost 39 aircraft and 14 pilots in 24 hours. Between the 24th of August and the 1st of September alone, 231 pilots were lost, a fifth of Fighter Command's total combat strength. Squadron averages collapsed from 26 operational pilots to 16. 6 of Park's 7 sector stations were severely damaged. Reserves of fighters in storage fell from over 500 to under 300. At that rate, Fighter Command estimated its reserves would be exhausted in 3 weeks, followed by the steady collapse of frontline squadrons. Pilots flew 3, 4, 5 sorties a day across 14 hours of summer daylight, sleeping between scrambles, running on nothing but tea and adrenaline. Looking back, Churchill himself admitted that between the 24th of August and the 6th of September, the scales had tilted against fighter command. Park could see it, on the plotting table, in the thinning markers, in the faces of controllers with fewer and fewer squadrons to send. The system he had helped to build was not failing because it was flawed. It was failing because there were not enough men left to make it work. A few more days and there would be no one left to intercept. But the Luftwaffe was about to make the greatest strategic blunder of the entire battle. It began with an accident. On the night of the 24th of August, a formation of German bombers drifted off course in the darkness. They were aiming for RAF airfields. Instead, their bombs fell on central London, destroying homes and taking civilian lives. It was not deliberate, but in war, intent matters less than consequence. Churchill ordered an immediate response. The next night, 81 RAF bombers attacked Berlin itself, hitting Tempelhof airfield and the Siemens factory works. The damage was negligible: a summer house in the suburbs, a section of the city zoo. But the damage to the Nazi regime was something else entirely, because Hermann Göring had publicly promised the German people that no enemy bomber would ever reach the capital. He had even staked his reputation on it, telling them that if it ever happened, they could call him Meyer. After that night, Berliners started calling the air raid sirens Meyer's hunting horns. Churchill sent bombers back to Berlin again and again, 5 more raids over the following 2 weeks, none of them causing serious damage, but every single one proving that Göring had lied. Hitler was enraged. On the 5th of September, he gave the order that would decide the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe was to stop attacking RAF airfields and switch its full force to London. This was not strategy. This was revenge. 2 days later, see, the 7th of September, the blow fell. 348 bombers, escorted by 617 fighters, came up the Thames from the sea, the largest formation anyone in Britain had ever seen. Nearly 1,000 aircraft in the sky at once, heading straight for London's Docklands. By evening, the entire East End was burning. Over 400 civilians were gone, more than 1,600 seriously hurt. And the fires were still raging when the night bombers arrived to finish the job. That evening, the War Office issued a single code word to every unit in the country: Cromwell. Invasion expected at any time. Across England, confused Home Guard units believed the Germans were already on the beaches. Church bells rang out in villages from Kent to Lincolnshire, the ancient signal that enemy troops were in the vicinity. Bridges were mined, roads were blocked. For one long night, Britain genuinely believed it was about to be invaded. But while London burned, something extraordinary was happening 30 miles to the south. Park's shattered aerodromes, the ones the Luftwaffe had been dismantling piece by piece for 12 days, were no longer being attacked. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, ground crews could repair runways without diving into shelters. Telephone lines were reconnected, operations rooms were rebuilt. Exhausted pilots slept through the night for the first time in weeks. The Germans believed fighter command was finished. Their intelligence told them the RAF had fewer than 300 fighters left. In reality, British factories under Lord Beaverbrook had kept pace with losses all along. The real crisis had never been aircraft. It had been pilots. And now Park had something he had not had since August: time. He used every hour of it. Damaged stations were restored. Fresh squadrons were rotated in. Polish and Czech pilots, exiled airmen desperate for a fight, were declared operational and thrown into the line. The system that had been on the verge of collapse began to function again. Years later, Park told a New Zealand journalist exactly what had happened. with the quiet certainty of a man who had watched it unfold from the plotting table. The enemy, he said, lost the Battle of Britain when they stopped attacking his airfields and switched to London. It was the greatest strategic blunder of the air war, and it gave Park exactly what he needed for the fight that was coming. Hitler had set the 17th of September as the date for the invasion of Britain, but it could not proceed without air superiority. So Goering issued one final order. On the 15th, every available bomber and fighter would strike London in one overwhelming blow. German air crews were told the RAF had fewer than 200 fighters left. One more push and it would be over. That Sunday morning at RAF Uxbridge, the underground headquarters of No. 11 Group, Park arrived early. WAAF plotters moved markers across the map with quiet efficiency, and mid-morning Winston Churchill himself arrived to watch the battle. At 10:30, Chain-Home radar picked up a hostile concentration forming over the Pas de Calais, more than 40 aircraft crossing into Kentish airspace. Park studied the plots alongside the Prime Minister. Were these bombers or a fighter sweep? He decided to gamble. At 11:15, he committed his squadrons. His tactic was precise. Rather than one great head-on collision, Park placed fighters in layers along the entire route the bombers would fly. Spitfires hit the high escort. Hurricanes drove into the bomber columns from the front. Fresh squadrons picked up the fight as the formation moved deeper inland. Every mile cost the German escorts fuel they could not spare. A strong headwind worked in Park's favor, burning through the escort's reserves even faster. By 7 minutes past 12, the Messerschmitt 109s began turning for France. Without them, the bombers were exposed. 6 Dorniers were brought down. Almost every survivor bore damage. By 1 in the afternoon, the first wave was over. There was barely time to breathe. Ground crews worked at desperate speed, refueling, rearming, patching, because everyone knew a second wave was coming. It came just before 2. 114 bombers in 4 columns, with a massive fighter escort, the blow that was supposed to finish everything. Park repeated his tactics. By 2:05, 20 squadrons were airborne, and then for one extraordinary hour, every single squadron in No. 11 Group was engaged simultaneously. In the bunker, the scene was unlike anything Churchill had witnessed. On the squadron status boards, each bulb represented a squadron. One by one, every bulb turned red. Engaged, 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 until not a single light showed anything else. Churchill turned to Park and asked what other reserves they had. "There are none, sir." The most powerful man in Britain and the man defending it both stared at a board showing that every fighter they possessed was already in the air, and fresh German formations were still crossing the coast. But those fighters were enough. The bomber formations broke apart over Kent and Surrey. Escorts drained of fuel turned back. Surviving bombers limped home to France, many so damaged they would never fly again. The Luftwaffe lost 56 aircraft that day, with more than 130 aircrew gone. The RAF lost 29 fighters and 12 pilots, but the system was unbroken. The next morning, every one of Park's squadrons was operational. The Luftwaffe would never come against fighter command in such strength again. 2 days later, Hitler quietly ordered Operation Sea Lion postponed until further notice. The invasion barges gathering in French and Belgian ports began to disperse. Britain would not be invaded. Not that autumn. Not ever. While Keith Park fought the Luftwaffe over southern England, a different kind of threat was forming behind him, not from the enemy, but from within the Royal Air Force itself. North of Park's territory sat No. 12 Group, commanded by Air Vice Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory. Unlike Park, Leigh-Mallory was a political creature, described by historians as a political animal, with friends in high places. He had no personal experience of fighter combat. What he had was ambition. After Dowding publicly reprimanded him in 1939 for implementing unauthorized tactics, Leigh-Mallory had stormed out of the meeting and declared he would move heaven and earth to get Dowding removed from his post. Now he saw his opportunity. Leigh-Mallory championed a concept called the Big Wing, assembling 3 to 5 squadrons, up to 60 fighters, into a single massive formation before engaging the enemy. On paper, it sounded devastating. In practice, the arithmetic was fatal. German bombers could cross the Channel in minutes. Park's fighters had roughly 20 minutes from radar detection to interception. A big wing took between 20 and 40 minutes just to assemble. By the time it was ready, the bombs had already fallen. But Leigh-Mallory had a weapon that Park did not, a direct line to political power. His most vocal supporter was squadron leader Douglas Bader, the famous legless fighter ace who had become a national hero. Bader was brave, charismatic, and frustrated at being stuck in 12 Group, while 11 Group fought the war. Crucially, Bader's adjutant was Flight Lieutenant Peter MacDonald, a sitting member of Parliament. MacDonald took the big wing argument straight past the chain of command and directly to Churchill. Senior politicians were soon talking first-hand to the legendary legless pilot, and in the corridors of the Air Ministry, Deputy Chief of the Air Staff Sholto Douglas worked quietly in the shadows. Records show extensive telephone traffic between Leigh-Mallory and Douglas, while almost none existed between Leigh-Mallory and either Dowding or Park. Douglas was the hidden hand, building the case against Dowding from within. Meanwhile, 12 Group had one simple operational duty: protect Park's airfields when his fighters were engaged further south. And time after time, they failed to do it. On the 26th of August, Dorniers broke through and dropped over 100 bombs on RAF Debden. Fighters from 12 Group were supposed to be covering the airfield. They never arrived because they could not obtain the correct radio frequency. 5 days later, on the 31st, Debden was hit again. Over 100 incendiary and high explosive bombs struck the barracks and sick quarters. Park later stated that the lack of cooperation from 12 Group concerned him more than the German raids themselves. The big wings claimed results were extraordinary and almost entirely fictitious. Post-war analysis revealed that on virtually every occasion, the formation overclaimed by as much as 7-1. The wing reported roughly 200 enemy aircraft destroyed during the battle. The actual figure was closer to 50. Dowding compiled a detailed report showing that between the 11th of September and the end of October, the big wing had managed just 10 interceptions and confirmed the destruction of one single German aircraft. The report was sent to the Air Ministry. It was ignored. And when the big wing advocates finally got their way, when Leigh-Mallory took over 11 Group and launched massed fighter sweeps over France in 1941, the results proved the theory hollow. Fighter Command lost 4 aircraft for every German machine it brought down. More than 500 pilots were gone in a single year, including Bader himself, captured over northern France. It was the bloodiest vindication of everything Park and Dowding had warned about. But in the autumn of 1940, none of that was yet known. All Park knew was that the men who should have been guarding his back were instead building the case for his removal. On the 17th of October 1940, barely 3 weeks after Britain had been saved, a meeting was called at the Air Ministry. The stated purpose was to discuss fighter tactics and the growing problem of night defence. The Chief of the Air Staff, Cyril Newall, had called the meeting, but Newall was conveniently taken ill at the last moment. The chair passed instead to his deputy, Sholto Douglas. Dowding arrived expecting to brief the ministry on the strategy that had just won the Battle of Britain. Park came expecting to discuss radar-guided night interception. What they found was an ambush. Sitting among the assembled air marshals and air vice marshals was the squadron leader, Douglas Bader. Leigh-Mallory had brought him so that the ministry could hear, as he put it, the views of a real fighting pilot. Bader was the only man in the room who had flown in the battle. He spoke with enormous energy and conviction about the big wing. Sholto Douglas listened intently. He did not invite any of the squadron leaders who disagreed. The pilots who had fought under Park's command, the men who had actually won the thing, were not asked for their opinion. Leigh-Mallory told the meeting he could assemble 5 squadrons and get them airborne in 6 minutes. Nobody in the room challenged him, yet every operational record told a different story. After months of practice, on the 29th of October, the Duxford wing took 17 minutes just to leave the ground, and a further 20 to form up and set course. An analysis completed on the 15th of November showed it took an average of 56 minutes for the wing to reach its patrol area. Leigh-Mallory's 6 minutes was not an estimate. It was a fiction. When it was over, Park knew what had happened. He drove straight back to his headquarters at Uxbridge and wrote a detailed rebuttal for the official record. He sent it to the Air Ministry. They refused to include it in the minutes. On the 25th of November, Sholto Douglas replaced Dowding as Commander-in-Chief of Fighter Command. Dowding was told his services were no longer required. His headquarters staff were ordered to vacate their offices within 48 hours. In December, Leigh-Mallory replaced Park as commander of No. 11 Group. The man who had failed to protect Park's airfields all summer was now sitting in Park's chair. Park was sent to command a training group in Gloucestershire, about as far from the front line as the RAF could put him. The Air Ministry then produced an official pamphlet describing the Battle of Britain. It did not mention Dowding. It did not mention Park. Churchill was furious. He wrote to the Air Minister that the pamphlet read like an account of Trafalgar with no mention of Nelson. As historian Len Dayton later observed, the RAF leadership treated Dowding and Park more vindictively for winning the Battle of Britain than Hermann Goering treated his own Luftwaffe generals for losing it. Goering's commanders had been defeated. Dowding and Park had proved the Air Ministry wrong, and that was the offence that could not be forgiven. The 2 men who saved Britain were gone. The men who had conspired against them were now in charge. And Keith Park, we know, who had controlled every fighter over southern England through the most desperate summer in British history, was teaching cadets in the countryside while his enemy flew his Hurricane out of his headquarters. After saving Britain, Keith Park was sent to run a training group in Gloucestershire, the RAF equivalent of exile. He spent 1941 teaching cadets, while Leigh-Mallory, now commanding 11 Group, launched big wings over France and lost over 500 pilots, proving Park had been right all along. In late 1941, Park was posted to Egypt. Then in July 1942 came Malta. The island had been bombed more heavily than London. Park arrived on the 14th of July by flying boat, landing in the middle of a raid. The outgoing commander had specifically asked him to circle the harbour until it passed. Park ignored the instruction and came straight in. Within days, he issued his forward interception plan. The principles were identical to those he had used over Britain. Meet the enemy before they reach their targets. Break up formations early. Hit the bombers head on. Within 6 days of implementation, Axis daylight raids over Malta stopped completely. The Stukas were withdrawn from the island altogether. In November 1942, Park was knighted. By 1944, he was an air marshal, commanding RAF Middle East. And then, in February 1945, came the appointment that even a novelist would hesitate to invent. Keith Park was named Allied Air Commander for Southeast Asia. It was the very post that Trafford Leigh-Mallory had been flying to take up. On the 14th of November 1944, Leigh-Mallory's aircraft had encountered severe weather over the French Alps. The crew advised turning back. Leigh-Mallory insisted they press on. The Avro York struck a mountainside near Grenoble. Everyone on board perished: Leigh-Mallory, his wife, and the entire crew. The Court of Inquiry concluded the tragedy could have been avoided had Leigh-Mallory not overruled the professional judgment of the men flying the aircraft. Park took up the post his adversary never reached. On the 12th of September 1945, he stood alongside Lord Mountbatten in Singapore as Japan formally surrendered in Southeast Asia. Park retired from the RAF in 1946 as an Air Chief Marshal. He returned to New Zealand, worked for Hawker Siddeley, selling aircraft across the Pacific, became a city councillor in Auckland, fought to build the city an international airport. In 1951, his younger son Colin, a police constable in Malaya, was lost in the line of duty. His wife Dorothy never fully recovered. On the 6th of February 1975, Keith Park passed away in Auckland. He was 82. He received a military funeral at Holy Trinity Cathedral. His ashes were scattered from an aircraft over the Waitemata Harbour at the request of his surviving son. For decades, the official record barely acknowledged him. The Air Ministry pamphlet describing the Battle of Britain did not contain his name. Then, slowly, the record began to correct itself. In 2009, a temporary statue of Park was placed on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square, built by Weta Workshop in New Zealand. And on the 15th of September 2010, exactly 70 years after the day Park saved Britain, a permanent bronze was unveiled at Waterloo Place in London, 9 feet tall. Flight suit, life jacket, gloves. The inscription on the plinth reads simply, Defender of London, 1940. Lord Tedder, head of the Royal Air Force, said of him, "If ever any one man won the Battle of Britain, it was Keith Park." And Douglas Bader, that same Bader, spoke at Park's memorial service in London. The awesome responsibility for this country's survival, he said, rested squarely on Keith Park's shoulders. Winston Churchill spoke his most famous words after climbing out of Park's bunker on the 15th of September, 1940. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. He was talking about Park's pilots. They were the few, because Keith Park commanded them.